999 women and 1 man sealed underground, and Vault-Tec called it a population study. The Fallout Bible gives that 2 sentences and moves on. And here's the thing, there is no real documented outcome, and the implications of that are far more sinister than most people realize on the surface. I used to read that as an omission, as Avalon just hadn't gotten around to writing an outcome before the Fallout Bible was finished, but I don't think that anymore. And by the end of this, I'm hoping that you'll realize the truth, too. The absence of a documented outcome is the answer. Not an omission, but the real answer. And I want to show you why that silence, specifically this case, together with the disturbing nature of this vault and what actually happened there, tells you more about what the Vault program was actually for and its secrets than almost any other entry in the series. The ratio, 999 to 1. Not roughly, exactly. Around 1,000 residents would have been simpler to organize. And Vault-Tec clearly had the resources and the ability to pull it off. They chose 999 to 1 anyway. The precision is the first clue about what they were actually measuring. They weren't studying uneven numbers generally. They were studying singularity. What happens when there is exactly 1? That's a different experiment from what happens when one gender significantly outnumbers the other. One is about proportions. The other is about what it means to be the only one of something inside a sealed population of 1,000. And Vault-Tec ran it in both directions simultaneously. The mirror experiment is Vault 68. 999 men, 1 woman, same ratio, inverted. Both are in the official documents. Both have no end result in any game. The fact that Vault-Tec ran both at the same time tells you they wanted data from both directions. They needed to see whether the outcome was symmetric or whether which group was scarce changed everything. The answer, as far as I can reconstruct it, is that it changes everything. The reason is worth understanding, because it's not just about gender. It's about what extreme scarcity of one group does to the group that isn't scarce. And that runs completely differently depending on which way the imbalance goes. In Vault 68, 1 woman among 999 men creates an immediate and well-documented kind of pressure. When reproductive access is scarce and there's no exit, that competition has nowhere to go except inward. There's no walking away. There's no founding a breakaway group down the corridor. There are just 999 people in a closed space where every single one of them has a reason to want to come out on top, and no way for that energy to go anywhere useful. Any historical situation, even vaguely like this one, all-male institutions under sustained stress, long naval expeditions, isolated outposts, produces the same pattern. Rigid hierarchies form quickly, and violence is what enforces them. Vault 68's setup makes that pattern worse by cutting off every possible way out. The woman in Vault 68 is in a position with no real historical parallel at this scale in a sealed space. She's simultaneously the most valuable and most at-risk person in the vault, and those two things don't cancel each other out. They make each other worse. Her safety depends entirely on whether the vault builds strong enough protective systems faster than the competition tears them apart. Given what Vault-Tec knew about how vault communities hold together under pressure, I genuinely don't think the odds are in her favor. My guess is that she spent most of her life either heavily protected by a dominant group or in constant danger from those outside it, with very little space in between. My guess about Vault 68 more broadly, and it is entirely a guess, is that it was a relatively short experiment. Not that everyone died in the first month, but the systems you'd need to build to keep 999 men and 1 woman stable are genuinely complicated, and building those takes time the vault's other dynamics were probably consuming from week 1. The people who held the most power inside Vault 68 almost certainly weren't the people the experiment needed to hold power for it to function, and once those hierarchies locked in, shifting them would have required either time or catastrophe. Vault 68 probably didn't have enough of either. Vault 69 ran longer, I'm confident in that. The dynamics of 999 women and 1 man don't produce the same immediate destabilization, because competition in female-majority contexts tends to work through social alliance and influence rather than direct confrontation, and it's more pointed at long-term security than immediate access. This isn't a value judgment. It's a pattern that shows up across multiple social species and has solid research behind it. Vault 69's community probably formed a working governance structure fairly quickly, because the overwhelming majority had broadly the same goal: keep the vault running. And the man's position in that structure is the part of this vault I genuinely cannot stop thinking about. He's not in immediate physical danger the way the woman in Vault 68 almost certainly was, but he's not in an ordinary position either. He's a minority of exactly 1 in a community of 1,000, and every role he might occupy, partner, parent, worker, community member, is permanently shaped by the fact that there is no one else like him. Think about what that actually means on a day-to-day level. There's no one he can compare notes with, no one who shares his particular situation. No reference point for what his position in this community is supposed to look like. There's no script for that, because nothing like it has ever existed before at this scale. One possibility is that he became peripheral to actual governance, not unimportant, not mistreated, but not central to how decisions got made. 999 people running a vault don't need one man to organize the food supply or settle disputes. What they need from him is specific and biological and entirely separate from the question of who runs things. Another possibility is that the fact that he was the one everyone needed translated into real informal authority, because communities have a habit of treating the most symbolically important person as the one who should run things. I genuinely don't know which is closer to true. He didn't choose any of it. The community didn't choose it. Vault-Tec chose it for everyone before the doors opened, and then sat back and watched what happened. And then there's the genetics. One man and 999 women is technically viable as a starting population, but the technically is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence. What Vault 69 built from day one was a scenario where every child born in that vault would share the same paternal DNA. Full stop, no variation, for all time. Every subsequent generation would compound that sameness. The second generation's children would all share the same paternal grandfather. By generation 4 or 5, you'd have a population converging on near total genetic sameness from the paternal side. The American cheetah is the standard reference for this kind of bottleneck. The species went through a severe collapse roughly 10,000 years ago and has been genetically near identical ever since. Modern cheetahs are so similar at the genome level that they can accept skin grafts from unrelated individuals without rejection, which sounds remarkable until you understand what it actually means. No variation in immune response. One novel pathogen could theoretically devastate the entire species because no individual has a meaningfully different defense than any other. Vault 69 was engineering a human version of that condition deliberately, in a sealed environment, with monitoring systems running throughout. That's not population research. That's a controlled experiment in genetic narrowing, using real people as the material. Vault-Tec knew this going in. The genetic narrowing was specifically what they were watching for, and the timeline of when it became measurable was exactly what they were building toward. That's not incidental. You don't design an experiment to run across multiple generations by accident. Someone sat down and planned this to run long enough for the bottleneck effects to become visible. That level of deliberateness tells you exactly who the data was for and what they plan to do with it eventually. The genetic angle matters enormously for why Vault 69 was designed the way it was. And to understand that fully, it helps to look at a different vault entirely, one with a fully documented outcome that shows exactly how Vault-Tec treated populations as material. Vault 81 is in the Commonwealth, and it's one of the few vaults in Fallout 4 that's still running when you find it. It trades with the outside world. It has actual functioning residents with names and opinions and real conversations. It's about as close to a normal vault as the franchise ever shows, which is exactly how it was designed to look. Its intended experiment was to infect the residents with diseases without their knowledge, and use their bodies as testing environments to develop a universal cure for human illness. The residents had no idea. They were recruited as shelter residents. They believed they were in a genuine survival vault, and the actual function of the facility was to run biological experiments on them using a hidden research wing without their consent. The original overseer, Dr. Olivet, sabotaged the experiment before it could fully run, which is why Vault 81 is still functional 2 centuries later. One person chose the residents over the data. That choice is what made it survivable. One overseer looked at the design, looked at the people she was responsible for, and decided the people mattered more than the data. The program didn't plan for that. It happened anyway. What Vault 81 tells us about Vault 69 is something specific. Vault-Tec had already developed and fully normalized the practice of using vault residents without their knowledge as biological material, not studying their behavior from the outside, using their bodies, using their genetics, using their reproductive capacity. The residents weren't meant to know they were in an experiment. That was standard practice, built into the program from the ground up. Vault 69 was using its residents the same way, not for disease research, but for research into what a population does when the starting numbers are extreme. The one man wasn't in the vault because Vault-Tec cared what happened to him. He was in the vault because his genetics were the variable. The 999 women weren't in the vault because Vault-Tec wanted to keep them safe. They were in the vault because they were the medium through which the experiment would run across generations. Neither group knew this. That's the point. The not knowing was part of the design. Informed participants behave differently than uninformed ones. Vault 81 proved Vault-Tec understood this and built for it. Vault 69 is just that same logic applied to an extreme imbalance rather than disease. There's something else Vault 81 confirms that I want to spend a minute on, because it changes how you read Vault 69's design. The experiment required a vault that worked well enough that the residents trusted it and kept going about their lives. A vault community that that collapsed in year 1 produced no usable data. The residents had to believe they were just living their lives inside a genuine shelter. Remove that belief, and the experiment stops. Vault 69 required the same thing at scale and across generations. The community had to be stable enough that the genetic experiment could run through multiple reproductive cycles. A vault that fell apart before the second generation produced no data about what a bottlenecked population looks like by generation 4 or 5. Vault-Tec designed the founding conditions to make community formation more likely. The 999-to-1 ratio with women as the majority was almost certainly chosen in part because it produced a more stable founding dynamic than the reverse. Vault 68 was probably the one they expected to end earlier. Vault 69 was the one they watched across a longer timeline. The stability wasn't an accident, it was a requirement. One more thing about Vault 81 that matters here. Dr. Olivet's decision to sabotage the experiment is documented in the game, and what makes it significant in the context of Vault 69 is what it says about the people running programs who didn't make that choice. Olivet saw the residents as people, and refused. The people running Vault 69 saw the residents as subjects and proceeded. Vault 81 makes the crucial point concrete. Refusal was possible. Someone, somewhere in the program, looked at what they were being asked to do and said no. Whatever happened in Vault 69, nobody in that vault's chain of oversight said no, which brings us to what probably happened inside, and why I think it lasted long enough to give Vault-Tec everything they were looking for. What truly happened inside, here's where confirmed lore ends and informed speculation begins. I'll be clear when I'm guessing, but I want to make a specific case rather than a vague one, because vague speculation about undocumented vaults is what makes lore videos feel like they're stalling. The community probably formed faster and more stably than Vault 68 did. The starting conditions for 999 women and 1 man don't create the same immediate pressure that Vault 68's setup did. The overwhelming majority had broadly the same goal: keep the vault running. And without the kind of pressure Vault 68 was dealing with from day one, this community had the space to actually build real governance. Councils, resource allocation, dispute resolution. That's not a small thing. A working governance structure in year 1 gives a community something to fall back on when stress comes later. It creates real inertia towards stability. Vault 68 probably never had the chance to build that inertia. Vault 92 is worth bringing in here. Those residents, a community of professional musicians with strong shared identity and real reasons to hold together, started falling apart under targeted audio stress within 14 months. By year 3, violent incidents were weekly. A community with every reason to be cohesive broke under specific targeted pressure. Vault 69's community had reasons to stay stable, but wasn't immune to that kind of pressure. The man was himself a standing source of potential tension, not because of anything he did, but because of what he represented. Any serious conflict over him, any dispute about who had children with him and whether that was fair, could function like Vault 92's audio system. Targeted pressure on a fault line, Vault-Tec was watching for exactly that. What I'm more confident about is the generational arc. The first generation has 999 women and 1 man. The second generation has a demographic mix shaped by whatever children the first generation produced. By the third or fourth generation, the extreme numbers gap has started to even out, because children of children have both parents contributing to the vault's demographics. The extreme starting condition was temporary. Vault-Tec knew this. They were watching the transition, the slow drift from an impossible starting point toward whatever the vault would eventually become. Not the founding, the slow, generational, invisible becoming, but the social structures built during the founding period don't even out with the demographics. Whatever the first generation figured out under stress became the second generation's baseline. Whatever the second generation treated as normal became the third generation's default. The founding conditions became invisible to the people who grew up inside them, because that's what founding conditions always do. You can't question the architecture of the world you were born into unless you have some way of knowing a different one exists. The generations of Vault 69 didn't. By the third or fourth generation, there were people in that vault who had never known anything else, who had no frame of reference for what a balanced community looked like, who understood their world entirely through the lens of what it had been built to be. Think about what that means, practically. The children of the second generation would have grown up in a vault where the specific social arrangements built around 1 man being demographically unique were just how things were. Not unusual, not worth questioning, just the world. Whatever Vault-Tec wanted to observe about how a community carries its origins forward without knowing it, that was running exactly as designed, but the genetic genetic narrowing was not temporary. By the third generation, every person in Vault 69 shared a bloodline going back to exactly one man. That level of sameness would start producing measurable effects by generation 4 or 5 in a closed population, not sudden collapse, more like a slow narrowing, compounding quietly across decades, reducing the community's ability to fight off disease and environmental stress in ways that build up before they become visible. Nobody inside the vault could see this happening. It would just feel like the community was getting slightly less resilient, generation by generation, for reasons that were hard to name. Vault Tech could see it. They were watching for exactly this timeline when the narrowing started, when it became measurable, when it stopped being something a community could manage. That was the experiment, not whether the community could form, not whether it could be stable for a year or two. They knew it could form. The question was what happened to it genetically over generational time, how quickly the narrowing compounded, and how that intersected with the social structures the founding had produced. That intersection, how the genetics and the community were shaping each other, was the data point they were actually after. And it was a data point you could only get by running the experiment for long enough. A single generation tells you almost nothing about genetic convergence. 2 generations gives you a trend. 3 or 4 generations gives you the shape of the curve. Vault 69 was designed to run long enough to produce that shape. And now, we come back to the silence. Why is there no documented outcome? Why does the Fallout Bible give Vault 69 2 sentences, and then nothing? I think I know the answer, and it changes how the whole entry reads. No report the Vault program didn't document outcomes for the residents. It documented outcomes for the data. And once you understand that distinction, the absence of a Vault 69 outcome stops looking like an omission and starts looking like a confirmation. The Enclave, the shadow continuation of the pre-war US government, was the client for the Vault program from the beginning. Vault overseers reported to them. The data the experiments generated was transmitted to them. This is confirmed lore. And their entire post-war project was built around rebuilding civilization from a small, curated starting group, the fraction of Vault survivors the selection mechanism identified as worth keeping. To make that plan work, they needed a specific answer to a specific question. How small can a starting population be, genetically, and still produce viable civilization across multiple generations? Vaults 68 and 69 were commissioned to find out. Vaults 68 and 69 were designed to test the floor of that question, not the ideal starting conditions. The minimum. What is the least you can start with, genetically and socially, and still get something that functions across multiple generations? Vault 68 tested one side of that floor. Vault 69 tested the other. The data they generated was about how quickly genetics narrow, how communities organize when the starting numbers are extreme, and how well those communities hold together when the starting conditions are working against them. That's not behavioral research in the way other Vault experiments were doing it. That's research into how to build a civilization from scratch, from the smallest possible starting group for an organization that had already decided that's what it was going to do. The Vault program ran dozens of experiments studying human behavior. Vaults 68 and 69 were the ones studying whether humanity could technically reconstruct itself from a near impossible starting point. That's a different kind of research, and the Enclave commissioned it for a specific reason. There is no documented outcome for Vault 69 because the outcome didn't matter to the people collecting the data. What mattered was the data itself, the timeline of genetic narrowing across generations, the rate at which the extreme starting imbalance evened out, the social structures that emerged from the founding conditions, and whether they held or changed as the demographics shifted, the point at which the bottleneck started producing measurable biological effects. Once the Enclave had all of that, the Vault's residents stopped being relevant to anyone keeping records. They were the medium through which the experiment ran, not the subject. The medium. Vault 81's overseer understood this and refused. She saw the residents as people rather than as material and chose accordingly. Nobody in Vault 69's chain of oversight appears to have made the same choice. Or if they did, it didn't make it into any documented record, which might be the same thing. That's what the silence means. It's not that nothing happened. Something happened in Vault 69 across multiple generations, and the Enclave considered whatever happened valuable enough to keep the experiment running for years or decades. And when the data collection phase concluded, whether because the genetic timeline had been fully mapped, or because the Vault collapsed under the narrowing effects, or because the problems built up from how it was started finally became too much, the file was closed. The residents weren't saved. They weren't documented. They weren't named. They were data, and the data was transmitted. I want to be specific about what transmitted means in this context, because it matters. The data went to the Enclave, the organization using it to plan the smallest viable starting group for their post-war reconstruction project. They were asking how small they could go and still get a functional result across generations. The answer they got back was almost certainly not this small. A 999-to-1 starting ratio builds a community that works for a while before the genetic and social problems compound into something unsurvivable. The minimum is bigger than this. progress. And the Enclave, as far as the franchise shows us, proceeded with their plan to use a small, curated starting group anyway. The data was advisory. The decision was already made. That might be the most Enclave thing about the entire story. They commissioned research to find the right answer, got it, and then did what they were going to do regardless. This is the most honest thing about the Vault program that Vault 69 shows you. Not the cruelty, because plenty of Vaults are more overtly cruel. Not the ambition, because the FEV program and Vault 75 were more ambitious. The honesty is in the stripped-down clarity of the design. No cover story about preserving musical heritage, no fake rehabilitation program with a 5-year setup, no elaborate annual sacrifice mechanism, just a ratio, a closed environment, and an experiment that was designed to run across generations without the residents knowing they were in it. Vault 81 had a cover story. Vault 95 had a cover story. Vault 92 had a cover story about cultural preservation. Vault 69 barely bothered. The cover story was just the word shelter. That was what they got. Shelter. That's the word Vault Tech used for all of them. Every experiment, every vault. Shelter. The word that made people walk through the door. The word that made the experiment possible. The man in Vault 69 had no name in the lore. The 999 had no names. None of the children born in the second or third or fourth generation had any names. The vault exists in the Fallout Bible as a number and a ratio, and then silence. Vault Tech created a community of real people, potentially hundreds across generations, and filed them as a data point, not as people, as a data point. That's what the silence is, not an absence, a classification. These people were classified as data rather than as people, and that classification is why they have no names and no documented outcomes and no wasteland communities that trace back to them. Vault 81 had a named overseer who made a choice. Vault 11 has 5 named survivors and an audio log and a quest that's considered one of the best in the franchise. Vault 95 has terminal entries with incident dates. Vault 92 has medical reports with injury tallies that become data points mid-sentence. All of these vaults have documentation because the documentation was the point. You document what you're studying. You file what matters to you. The silence around Vault 69 is Vault Tech telling you, in the absence of any documentation at all, exactly what the people inside it were to the program. The wasteland is full of communities that came out of vaults and built things Vault Tech never planned for. Vault City, the NCR, the 5 survivors of Vault 11 who walked out into the Mojave carrying the weight of everything that happened before them and decided to keep going. None of those communities were supposed to matter to anyone except as data sources. They mattered anyway. They built things and named themselves and made the kind of history that doesn't fit in a Vault Tech report. And here's the thing about the minimum number. Whatever the Enclave calculated it to be after Vault 68 and 69, the wasteland kept exceeding it. Communities that formed from terrible starting conditions and built something anyway, not because the data said they should be able to, but because people have a consistent habit of doing things the minimum doesn't account for. The Vault program spent decades measuring floors. The wasteland kept ignoring them. That habit, the one that makes people build things in conditions that shouldn't support building, is arguably the most important finding the Vault program ever produced. And it was the one finding the Enclave wasn't looking for, didn't design for, and apparently didn't know what to do with. Whether anyone walked out of Vault 69 and did the same, the lore doesn't say. But I think about it. The man with no name, the 999 with no names, the children born in the second and third and fourth generation with no names. Whether any of them walked out into the wasteland and became something the data didn't predict. The Fallout Bible gives Vault 69 2 sentences, and then silence. And I've come to think that silence is the most complete answer the lore could have given. Not because nothing happened, but because the people who would have documented it didn't consider the residents worth documenting. And the people inside had no way of knowing they were an experiment at all. That gap between what was being measured and what was being lived is what Vault 69 is actually about. That question is exactly what the Vault was designed to produce, just not in any form Vault Tech ever intended to care about. If you've enjoyed the video and want to see who are the most evil characters in Fallout, click the video on the screen.